At this point in time, we are blessed with the appearance of Christy Moore, who is with the Ferguson Group, who I'm sure has some words of wisdom for us in behalf of our lobbyist that we hire. And she's the representative that we see mostly. Christy, it's all yours.
This is on. Good evening, Chairman. Thank you for that, and members of the board. It's always a pleasure coming up here. I've actually been up here all afternoon on different meetings related to the agenda. I'm going to do a little bit of a shorter presentation than I typically do, because I don't know if you want to sit here and listen to me drone on and on about what is going on and what is not going on in Washington. Before you have, we did submit a recommended federal agenda for this year for the county to follow. It's a lot of the same items that have been priorities for the county in the past, and I'd like to revisit that at the end of my presentation to get your direction and your emphasis in terms of priorities. I wanted to highlight a couple of the items that we did work on over the past year on behalf of the county and some of the successes we saw there. One of the largest priorities in the beginning of the year was advocacy on the National Flood Insurance Program. This involved two different aspects: the agricultural floodplain issues that we're facing in terms of development and maintaining and sustaining agriculture in the floodplain under flood management requirements, as well as some increases in the flood insurance rates that were coming out of policy changes to the National Flood Insurance Program. Congress passed a rather large bill called the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act, which actually reduced some of those flood insurance rates increases and delayed some of them until further notice, and mainly until after a full investigation and analysis could be done on the affordability of national flood insurance policies for those that were living and doing business in the floodplain. We'll focus on that again this year. That study should come out this year, and from then it should give guidelines to Congress on how to address those affordability issues before moving on with implementing some of those rate increases. And the other aspect of that in terms of the agricultural floodplain management issues was that a study that was supported by Sutter County as well as the Agricultural Floodplain Management Alliance was approved and finalized. And again, that will be rolling into the overall General Affordability Act issues that Congress will be looking at and addressing this year along with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Our other big item this year was Sutter Forward. That was continuing on in terms of the economic development plan and the strategic plan that the board has been involved in through your representation and your members on the Economic Development Ad Hoc Committee. That process has taken the information that we gathered from the stakeholder meetings and processing that and analyzing that and looking at your infrastructure needs in the priority areas. We reported to the board earlier and last year on that process and actually had a reconvening of the ad hoc committee this afternoon to start mapping out our course for this year, which includes more public outreach and also identifying federal funding sources either through grants or financing for some of the infrastructure in the targeted areas of Sutter Forward. We also supported one of the things that we have seen in general, and we'll get into this in terms of the priorities for this year, is that there's a lot of rulemakings coming out of this administration. President Obama and his federal agencies are developing a lot of rules that will change federal policy and regulations, and as those apply to the ground, two of them have significantly will impact Sutter County significantly. One of those is the definition of waters of the U.S. I won't get into the technicalities of that, but it's an ongoing debate, and it is one that is being moving forward under the direction of the Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency. We supported and helped the county submit public comments on the proposed rulemaking for waters of the U.S., and we continue to develop an advocacy strategy with Sutter County as well as some other partners on how to address that and change the rulemaking so it doesn't impact Sutter County residents as much as the current proposed one is. It's a very technical, very ongoing process, and we continue, and I expect that to continue throughout the year, if not longer, unfortunately. On the same note, we also saw a critical habitat designation rule come out for the western yellow-billed cuckoo bird. And that affects and is a big impact to flood control projects. In particular, part of the Sutter bypass was identified as the critical habitat designation for the yellow-billed cuckoo. So we work with the county and county staff to again submit comments and become engaged in that process. We just heard about 10 days ago that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is in the process of evaluating and reading 80,000 comments on that one rulemaking, and they're expected to take a year to do so. So again, that's something that we'll be continuing to watch and engage in when necessary on behalf of the county. We've also worked closely with SBUFCA, with the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency, on the finalization of the feasibility study, as well as advocating for and successfully securing an authorization. We've supported SBUFCA and their lobbying team in those efforts, which did result in a full authorization of the Feather River Levee project, which was included in the Water Resources Development Act of last year, 2014. Our efforts this year will focus on the funding for that and supporting SBUFCA and their partners in terms of how we are going to advocate and get the funding for that, the federal funding out of that authorization for the project. And drought legislation. Drought legislation for the last 6 months of the 113th Congress, if not longer, was one of the highest priorities for not only California delegation, but also some other Western senators and congressmen, and we expect that to continue on. They recessed for the year without passing any major California drought legislation. They proposed a lot, but they weren't able to pass any, and that process has continued on to this year. There is 1 or 2 bills that have been proposed that relate to the California drought, but we haven't seen that massive, all-encompassing drought legislation proposals that we've seen last year. We expect to see that coming out in the matter of months, if not weeks, and we'll be looking at that and curtailing any comments and suggestions that we would have for the county. And the other pieces of legislation haven't touched the county as much, but certainly the drought relief, the funding coming out of that to help communities who have dry wells, for example. Those are places that we have interjected on behalf of the county in the past. So a lot of those issues you'll see are still on the federal agenda as they either wrap up or continue to accelerate, and we'll continue to work on those for the county as we move forward next year. I think the highest emphasis should be on national flood insurance protection policy, as well as flood protection in general in terms of your infrastructure. A lot of things will be materializing for that, not only the construction and the progress of the Feather River Levee project, but also how Congress is going to deal with the rate increases that are being proposed and being implemented under the National Flood Insurance Program. Drought planning and relief, we've had a lot of conversation over the last few months with county staff, with county water resources staff, on ideas on to help prepare the county better for drought and to look at some of your natural resources and some of your benefits to help those in the region prepare and respond to drought. So we're going to continue to develop those ideas. We might come back and report to you on those later in the year as we kind of continue to feel those out. And most importantly, economic development and growth. Again, moving forward on the Sutter Forward process, developing that list of infrastructure needs. We will be prioritizing the Sutter Forward and the economic development and growth in Washington, D.C. When Supervisor Flores and county staff meet with the delegation there in Washington, D.C. to again promote those and really bring that relief down to the county in terms of the economic development and planning. So that's all I had. I know it's a quick shot and a quick overview. I really wanted to open it up to you guys to see if you had any questions. And then if you don't have any questions, look in terms of if you have any suggestions to additions and or prioritization. So I'll.
Through the chair. Christy, thanks for the presentation. Appreciate it. There's a lot going on, obviously, in Washington, I can see. And spent the afternoon with you and got a lot of education. As you know, being here for 4 weeks and picking up on all the acronyms is really interesting. And one of those that you talked about is definition of waters of the U.S. Can you just, you don't have to elaborate. I know it's complicated, elaborate too much, but just for the benefit of not just the audience but myself, like exactly what that's about?
Sure.
Okay.
The acronym for that is WOTUS, which is how I refer to it, is WOTUS, W-O-T-U-S. But Waters of the U.S., I'm not an attorney, and I don't pretend to be an attorney, but Waters of the U.S. is actually a technical definition of that provides jurisdiction over the nation's waterways for the Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency. And so the debate on how to redefine waters of the U.S. and therefore which waterways federal agencies will have jurisdiction over in terms of protection has been ongoing for years. And so this rulemaking was a proposal by the administration on how they think that definition should read, and therefore what waters should have jurisdiction. It goes as far as to say that a ditch with no water in it has jurisdiction, that federal agencies have jurisdictions over there. That means it would be protected, and therefore you'd have restrictions on its use. Yeah. That's the quick shot at it. It gets much more technical and much more political beyond that.
That's a good definition. Good enough. Thank you. And then you talked a little bit about the drought legislation. Do you have any thoughts on some of the bills that are being presented? I know a lot of times they don't consider the rural communities like us, and so is there anything that?
Yeah, there was a slew of them, of drought legislation that was related to California last year. Senator Feinstein was the lead on that in the Senate. And it gets, again, very controversial, some of them do. There was a lot of back and forth between Senator Feinstein as well as the House Republicans on what should happen. Most of it pertained to the San Joaquin Valley and the issues that related there to the Bay Delta. But what it really boils down to is we're in a 4-year drought, and there's not enough water to supply and meet the needs of the entire state, so something has to give. So the reason that they necessarily haven't been able to come to an agreement is because of that, of all of the laws and all of the regulations that are out there in terms of where the water should go. Water rights is the biggest thing that we have protected and advocated for on behalf of Sutter County, is to make sure that water rights and senior water rights of the North State continue and remain and are not harmed by any legislation that goes forward. What we expect to see this year is a Western bill. With the shift in power in the Senate, there is a contingency of Western senators that want to see west-wide drought issues handled, because the drought was not only in California, but it was in Western states. So it's really what we're expecting to see is more of a Western bill, looking at ways to increase conservation, increase reuse, look at different ways to increase storage, because we can't make it rain. So there's a lot of issues that relate in there, but they're working on the bill right now, both in the House and the Senate. So we expect to see something probably around the time that we're back there.
Okay, thank you.
But the biggest priority from the county's perspective has been advocating to protect those water rights and senior water rights.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
Last night I had the opportunity to talk with our newly elected Assemblyman James Gallagher, and those issues are being addressed at the state level as well through water storage. And actually, Assemblyman Gallagher kind of gave me a history that we haven't done water storage within about 20 years, and the population obviously has been increased in millions, and yet we haven't done anything to preserve our water rights. So state assembly as well as the other state legislators are working on introducing certain bills that will increase our water storage within California. He did not give me a time frame on that, but that's some of the things that they are working on.
Christy, I have a question for you, and it follows up with what Supervisor Whitaker is talking about. I think the last meaningful water storage possibility or facility that we had in California was Lake Oroville back in the 60s, the last meaningful. Where does something, is there a mentality in your mind, and I know it's just a shot from the hip, as to where does something like that start? Does it start at the federal level, or does it start at the state level? Or in other words, who says we need to start putting more water away?
Many people have been saying it been with the firm for 15 years, and I think we've said it for 15 years, if not more than that. And there's I'm trying to think of the short answer to that question. We can't make it rain, but we can catch the rain. And so I think that that is the biggest proponent of storage. What would this year look like if we had additional storage? No one knows, but most people believe it would have looked better. And so where does that come from? Where do you put that? That's what's being debated. Where's the best place to feed that into the state system is the most difficult question right now.
But I mean, does that kind of, let's say, okay, somebody says, okay, California needs another dam. Does that initially start at the Fed level and move to the state, or does it start at the state level and move to the feds?
It starts at the local level, I think.
At the local level?
Yeah, and I think it starts at the project sponsor in terms of there is state legislation to move forward on storage. There's multiple sites that have been discussed in terms of where that storage would be, north of the Delta, south of the Delta. One of the most, probably one of the biggest prospects is Sites Reservoir, which is located in the North State. And that would be, and then, but then beyond that, it's how is it used, and how is the water that's stored there used? Is it used for agricultural purposes? Is it used for municipal purposes? Is it used for environmental purposes? So that's where the big conversation rolls in. Most of the debate on water storage and water resources in the state is centered on the Bay Delta, and really looking at what's happening there. You do have the BDCP, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. Moving forward, that's where the state is engaged, which is what Supervisor Whitaker referenced to, Assemblymember Gallagher, it's odd to call him that, is working on there. And it does cross over to the federal side. The federal agencies are actually stakeholders in that process. And they are the ones that operate some of the facilities, but not all the facilities. So it's really a joint effort in the local communities and the local agencies coming and saying this is what we need, the state saying this is what we need, and the federal government saying this is what we need.
Okay.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
Also, Supervisor Solinger, if you go to our partners, the Northern California Association, you can also see selected sites that have been proposed for water storages within the northern region. And obviously, Chrissy said, site reservoirs that have potential sites that obviously have to get through the red tape of going through the environmental reviews and stuff. But those are sites that have already been determined by our association.
Thank you. My question basically was, where does it start first,
Yeah.
the feds or the state or whatever? But any information is useful. Thank you, Christy. Unless someone else has something to add.
One qualifying on that. Storage is just one component of it, too. A lot of the legislation and the needs that are out there, especially in the local side, go beyond just storage. There's proposals for ways to create more interregional dependency on local water plans. So that's through integrated regional water management plans, which you see on your agenda. That's through looking at habitat conservation plans and where water can be addressed there and habitat needs can be addressed there. So there's all these planning mechanisms that go beyond just storage in terms of looking at that as well. So
Great.
it's just a component of it.
Okay.
Right, through the chair.
Yes, sir.
Through the past, actually part of Warville and Bullards was supposed to be the Marysville Dam, and we never got that one. Then the Auburn Dam was started, and they did the tunnels to transfer the water for the dam, and they had the anchors in, and federal shut that down. And it'll take years for sites. I mean, we're in an environmental fight. Just like the yellow-billed cuckoo, which nobody can find, and they said it's a shy bird. I mean,
Yeah.
all these
It's in
environmental...
Yuba County.
Yeah. Well, when I was in Colorado, they're fighting the same thing. You know,
Yeah.
here they are, the yellow-billed cuckoo, clear in Colorado. And it's a South American bird, and it's just migrating north. So, anyway, we're fighting environmentalists.
Thank you for that update. Made my day. Unless there's anything more, Christy, we thank you for your
thank you.
enlightenment tonight, and we always look forward for hearing from our Washington, D.C. arm.
Sure.
To approve it. Make a motion, then we approve the federal agenda for the fiscal year 2016.
A second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimously carried.
Thank you.
At this point, we